Time to get married. She's thinking a good marriage is the solution here. If you look at verse 2, we see she mentions Boaz. And now is not Boaz one of our kindred? Is not Boaz one of our relatives, in other words? So she's thinking, hey, Ruth, I'm thinking maybe you should marry Boaz. Maybe you should think about that. And I'm sure Naomi herself had been thinking about this for a bit of time now. For one thing, she had seen Boaz's kindness to Ruth, as she says here, how he allowed her to glean with the other female workers, the maidens. And Boaz had shown that he was committed to caring for Ruth and showing love towards her. But also, once again, notice how Naomi mentions that Boaz was a kindred or a relative, in other words. And last time we spoke about the responsibilities of the kinsman redeemer, and we saw how under Israelite law, whenever an Israelite was in some kind of poverty, the closest relative would have a responsibility to step in and redeem them from that situation, to buy them out of that situation. So, for example, if an Israelite became poor and sold themselves into slavery, then their nearest kinsman or relative would come and redeem them from that slavery by paying for their freedom. And again, you can read about the kinsman redeemer's role specifically in Leviticus 25. Now we're seeing here, we're learning that this had developed into a bit of a practice in ancient Israel, okay, where the nearest kinsman would come along and marry the Israelite that was in need in order to redeem her from poverty and bring her under his care in marriage. But we should take careful note here that Leviticus 25 does not mention the kinsman redeemer's responsibility to marry a relative in order to bail them out of poverty. Okay, you don't see that in Leviticus 25. So where would we see that? Well, Deuteronomy 25, specifically verses 5 to 10, does touch on this a little more closely. Okay, I won't read it now, but you can take a note of it and look at it on your own time. In Deuteronomy 25, verses 5 to 10, we do in fact see how in the Mosaic law that a brother was required to marry his husband's wife if the husband were to die and the wife would become widowed, and there was no child or no progeny to continue that family line. In that event, the brother had a responsibility then to marry his deceased brother's wife. Okay, so in Israel, if a married woman had no children and her husband died, then the brother of the deceased husband would step in and marry her and have children. And in this way, the family lineage would continue. And of course, he was to do this, assuming he himself was not married yet. But that was the stipulation. That was the stipulation. And this was an important practice in Israel because Israel was a 12-tribe nation. That's how God designed it. That was part of their identity. And that's why it was a very sad thing in the book of Judges when one of the tribes, if my memory serves me well, I believe it was the tribe of Benjamin, that was basically wiped out. It was a sad thing. One of their own is gone, finished. And so it was important that each of these tribes continue existing, and to continue existing even within the land that was designated to them. And so that's why you see these practices in Deuteronomy 25, where marrying the childless widow ensured the continuation of each of the tribes and the raising of a progeny. So now all this to say, it appears that the principles of Leviticus 25 and Deuteronomy 25 speak to the appropriateness of Boaz stepping up to marry Ruth. Okay, in Leviticus 25, we see the emphasis there on the responsibility of the kinsman redeemer to care and provide for the relative who is in need. And then in Deuteronomy 25, we see that focus there on the Israelites' responsibility to marry his deceased brother's wife. So there is a command there that calls on the kinsman or nearest relative to marry a widow within the clan. So all this to say that what we're seeing in the situation of Boaz and Ruth and what Naomi's thinking, what we're seeing there is a combination of certain principles from these two chapters in the Mosaic Law. And that opened the door for Naomi to then say it would be good for Boaz to marry Ruth, become her provider, and bring her the rest that she would need. And so she sees marriage to Boaz as the solution for Ruth. She sees this as a great opportunity. And secondly, notice that she wants to really seize this opportunity to get Ruth married to Boaz. And so what does she do? She instructs Ruth to prepare herself to meet Boaz and basically present the opportunity for him to marry her. Not necessarily the official proposal, but at least propose the thought to him. And there are three things here that we can see Naomi instructs Ruth to do. Okay, first, she tells her to prepare her appearance. Notice she says, "Wash thyself, therefore, and anoint thee, and put thy raiment upon thee." So in other words, take a bath,